Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me
Good
well?
evening.
Good evening.
Yes.
That's good. That's good. I was there all the time, but I wasn't sure yet whether I should switch on my screen yet. Okay. How have you been? Anyone? Did anyone join last time I gave the teaching?
Yes, I was on last time.
Me
Oh,
too.
good. That's good. So, I told you last time I've been to Newcastle before,
Yeah.
and it's been a while now. I remember. I think some of your faces look very familiar, but I don't want to. I'm not completely 100% sure. And yeah, I remember the time when we did the meditation every Wednesday, and there was also there were two classes. We had a beginners, and we had also a class for the people who would like to. But that was a long time ago. Okay. Well, today I've also been talking. We'll be talking about conquering your fears, or the subject I've been talking about in a previous program for the Q&A, or good questions and answers, which is like an online broadcast which they do in Thailand, and it's we talked about this for a while, and it was quite a subject which a lot of people were interested in. So I thought maybe this would be a useful subject to talk about in this community, in this group.
Yeah.
Okay, but let us first maybe meditate a bit together. I have to admit that this is a slightly different, what do you call it? Slightly different interface than the one that I'm used to. So I just have to be a bit slow today. Okay, well, usually when I guide meditation, it's a bit intuitive. It's not exactly the same as you might be used to, but it's the same tradition. So maybe it's slightly different than what you're used to, but same tradition. Okay. Shall we start with the meditation, or is there anything else we would like to discuss first?
That's fine.
Good. All right. So I recommend everyone always to do the meditation together when you are doing the meditation, to prepare yourself well. If you have anything that you need to prepare now, just better make sure that you got everything prepared. And also you want to make sure that you are properly seated. If you're sitting on a chair, you might want to just make sure that you're seated straight. So best is to sit straight on the chair. But even if you're leaning, you just have to make sure that you have that your back is a bit straight. And you might also want to stretch your back a little just before you lean backwards. If you're sitting on the floor, then you have to make sure that you're seated comfortably, but at the same time alert. So straight back is also very important. And it's important that you do not hunch your shoulders forward. So in order to do that, in some postures, like normal cross-legged postures, sometimes you tend to hunch. So it's important to make sure that you have some cushion or some kind to put your hands on, or something like that. So may I ask everyone to switch off their sounds? the sound so that there will be no echo. Thank you. So let us first start by making sure that we are properly seated, that we make sure that we have the time, that we feel like we have all the time in the world. Then we start by breathing in deeply. And we breathe out slowly a couple of times. And then we relax our eyes first. Relaxing our eyes, our eyelids, the muscles in between our eyes, the muscles in the corner of our eyes, every part. And we might feel that our eyelids are slightly open, not completely closed. And then we relax the rest of our body, making sure that we can easily relax. We might want to relax from the top of our head to the tips of our toes. Or you might want to relax from your center outward. Allow all your muscles to fully relax. Until you reach the tips of your fingers and toes, your face, every part. There is no need to rush. It's important that we have enough time, we spend enough time to relax every part. We cannot command our body to relax. We need to give ourselves some time. Eventually, we will find that our entire body becomes fully relaxed. But it may take a while, and it's important that we have to give our body the time and space. We simply are aware that we are no longer actively using our body at all. We simply sit straight, but we do not need to use our body at all. As we are able to relax our body, we can let go of it. We don't feel it's a burden anymore. And then we relax our mind as well. We might imagine that we're sitting in a field or in a valley of some kind, or in a plain. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to go anywhere. We are happy and at ease. We, of course, do have some thoughts that come up and go, but we do not need to respond to our thoughts. We just let our thoughts come and go, just like the birds in the sky. They come and they go. And as our mind is able to not respond, we find that all our thoughts and feelings, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant, they simply come and go. We don't need to do much. We simply are aware and we let it be. Just like a tube in which the water just flows and the tube doesn't have to do anything. We simply allow our thoughts, our stream of consciousness to flow. We do not respond to all the invitations of our thoughts, whether we have pain or pleasure, nice thoughts or not nice thoughts. It's all the same. It's all just noise. And we allow it to come and go on its own accord. Sometimes we like to rush ourselves. We like to be more peaceful, but we do not need to struggle or push ourselves to become more peaceful. There already is peace inside of us. We simply just are aware and we just are in the present moment. And as we are in the present moment, we just dwell in the present moment. We gradually find that we no longer feel we need to push anything. And we accept how we are and how we feel. And at a certain point, we feel content. as we are gradually feeling more at ease, we also notice that we have more emptiness and space within ourselves, like an empty, open space within, perhaps even hollow, a hollow, empty space within that's good, and it feels at ease. Then we gradually come to the next part in which we connect with the center of the body by simply breathing in deeply once more, but not to relax, but to be aware, to be aware. We breathe in and we notice how our breath goes in through our lungs, downwards to our abdomen. And we notice that inside at the end of our in-breath and at the beginning of our out-breath, there is the point, the space where our mind is at ease. This we can call the center of the body, or the station of the mind, or the center space at the end of our breath, at the turning point of our breath. We simply become aware of this center space within. And as we become aware of the center space, we notice that this is the place where body and mind are in balance. This is the place where our mind is most clear. The center space within. And we simply are aware of the existence of this space. There's not much more we need to do. Simply being aware of the center space within. And we can reconfirm the center space as often as we like. Our awareness of the center space is very soft and very kind and gentle, just like a little feather which is gravitating downwards landing on the water. And as we are becoming aware and grow used to the center more often, we feel more at ease and we feel more spacious. We do not need to do much or rush into anything. We can think of this part of the meditation as simply waiting. We wait and we sit as we are in the here and now, in the present moment. We wait patiently. We do not know what we are waiting for. We simply wait and we are content and happy just being in the here and now. We wait together. We have all the time in the world. And as we are waiting and reaffirming the center space within, we notice that our mind becomes even more empty, and we also feel more light. If we find that we sometimes forget about the center space, we may use a mantra. We listen to the deep and relaxing inner voice. Sammadang, Sammadang, Sammadang. The inner voice is just like our own voice, but it's deep inside. And we notice the inner voice within us. And sometimes we may listen to our inner voice often, or sometimes we may not listen to it at all. It's all perfectly fine. Sometimes the inner voice just fades away and it's gone. But that's all perfectly fine. We don't need to do much. We don't need to do anything about it. We are happy and at ease, and we don't have to do anything. In the words of Luang Por Paknam, the great meditation master, from the beginning until enlightenment, it's all just a matter of stilling the mind. Very softly and gently, just like the feather landing on the water, or just like a little boat which is entering a port. Very softly and gently. There is no need to rush, and we can always go back to our inner being, to our inner consciousness, if we find ourselves more at ease just being in the present moment. As we come to the final part of the meditation, we allow the energy of meditation to spread. We smile at ourselves and we allow the feeling and energy of inner peace to expand outwards, to cover our entire being. And we smile to ourselves and wish that we may be happy, free from suffering, and that we may be healthy and strong. And then we allow the energy of the meditation to expand outwards, that everyone around us may be happy, may be free from suffering and sorrow. May everyone be happy. May everyone be healthy and strong. And now we have come to the final part of the meditation, and we are gradually becoming aware of our senses, of our 5 senses. We notice the sounds of our neighbors or the birds in the sky. We notice the mat, the seat on which we are sitting. We notice our body, our hands resting on our lap. And we might notice our lips being drier or being a little dry. We might also notice the temperature in the room. Now we have come to the final part of the meditation, and we remind ourselves that we can always go back to the center space within. Then we gradually open our eyes at the end of the meditation, and I will close with a final chant, which is used at the end of the meditation. Sappe Buddha Palapata Pache Kananchayang Palang Arahanta Nanchate Jenarakhang Pantami Sapaso Sapaputtha Nupavena Sapathamma Nupavena Sapasangha Nupavena Satha Soti Bhavantu Te. All right. So how was the meditation? Are you okay? Wants to comment? Anyone wants to say something about that?
Thank you. It was very relaxing, very nice.
Oh, that's good to hear. Were you able to connect with your center?
Yes, yes, I was very, very calm after the way the things are these days. I think it's really relaxing if you can just have a few minutes for yourself and try and forget about what's going on, which is very difficult.
Is it? You are in a moment of your life which is difficult?
I think just the world it's so worrying, isn't it? It's what's going on. It's very sad. And you feel quite useless, as if you can't help, you know. Lots of people would like to help, and it's really, you know, trying to give that help, but maybe this all helps us. So thank you.
Well, at least we have a healthy and strong body and mind, and that is also one way to help the world.
It is.
through meditation. Because when we meditate, often just the biological fact that our heart rate becomes less, that's already very good for our health. And also it's important that we, in that way, have a good immune system and we are healthy and strong. And we also, in that way, we have more inner strength to help other people as well.
That's true. Thank you.
Yes, there is, the subject of today is conquering your fears. It's a very courageous subject, isn't it? And I will just, can I share the screen? Yes?
Yeah.
May I share the screen, please? Yeah. Lumpi Karucha, can I share the screen? Maybe it's...
That's okay, Lumpi Sander. I think you can share it now.
I'm not allowed to, because they say there is somebody else sharing the screen. I'm competing with somebody.
Oh, sorry, I think you can share it now. Sorry.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this is a question that comes up often, when the current situation comes, we come back to the question, how do we deal with our emotions in every time and every moment of difficulty? We come back to the same question as we have before, that how do we deal with our emotion? How do we deal with our mind? And in fact, every time we meditate, we will normally have that question in our mind. How do we deal with our mind? How do we take care of our mind? So that is something that can be helpful to talk about. Of course, the topic of today, conquering your fears, is pretty courageous, but maybe that's helpful. In the Buddhist text, there are several fears that are mentioned. Fear because of your work, fear to lose your reputation, fear of embarrassment, and even fear of death and an unhappy afterlife. These are the fears that people might have in their lives. But it's not always useful to have fear. There is, in fact, some fears that are very destructive. And in Buddhist psychology, we often say that everything in our lives that leads to suffering, it comes from three sources: from greed, from hatred, and from delusion. And greed, hatred, and delusions, we sometimes in English translation, we call them the defilements. And greed is everything that we like to have that doesn't really help us. Desires that are not based on wisdom. Hatred is quite clear, and delusion, it means that things that we are looking at the world not exactly as it is. So sometimes when we are afraid of something, it doesn't really help us, and we are not really seeing things as they really are. But other times, fear can be useful. There is, in the Buddhism, there is the idea that we should fear the consequences of our own wrong actions. In other words, we should have some moral sense of, that if I hurt somebody, I don't want to hurt somebody. This is actually also a sort of fear, but it's it might be to some extent quite good to, be careful and not wanting to hurt another person. This is sometimes called a useful fear, or something that is useful to be careful about. To be careful about your actions is not in generally wrong. So you could say, you could also call this useful fear, you could call it caution. Sometimes, I think the ancient Greeks, they distinguished between caution and fear. You could also find another deep kind of fear, which is the fear of the limitations of life. Sometimes it's called the dangers of the cycle of existence, but it sounds pretty technical. For example, when the Buddha had not yet become the Buddha, when he was still called Prince Siddhartha, as you might know, the Buddha was actually a prince before he became the Buddha, right? The Buddha is a title. He was a human being, and at a certain point, he decided to become a monk and decided to find enlightenment, and eventually he was successful in that. But before he became enlightened, there was one turning point in his life when he was still living in a palace, living in his royal family, when one day he saw an old person, sick person, a dead person, and these were the sort of things that kind of woke him up to the reality of life, that we all must grow old someday, we all must be sick sometimes, and we all must die. This is sort of a thing that you could also consider a sort of fear or sort of sense of caution or a sense of wisdom. And that is sometimes also translated as sense of urgency. So that is not really, generally in English, we don't really call that fear, it calls more like caution. So what really remains is the sort of fear that is not useful. And that is often in our lives, very often an obstacle. Very often the fears that we have in our lives are really not making us any happier. And sometimes the very thing that we fear is what causes us to go to a certain destination in our lives. So there's a famous story about a ship which you may have heard of, this story. It's called the Essex. It was, I believe it was in the 19th century. And there was a ship that had, there was a problem with the ship. There was some problems with the weather, and the entire ship was sank. But a number of people were able to escape from the ship before it sank. In a little boat, they were able to survive for many days. And when they were paddling the little boat, on the big ocean, the large big ocean, they were discussing amongst themselves where they should go and what should they do next. They didn't have much food. So they had the choices between two places to go to. There was one island which was very close, but there was stories and myths that this island had people who ate human beings, or who were cannibals. Of course, we write in the current day and age, we know that these stories are myths, but in those days they didn't know that. So they were so afraid of these cannibals that they decided very faithfully that they were not going to that island. They decided they were going to very much farther to the mainland. And eventually their decision to paddle all the way to the mainland, which took many days, caused them to run out of food and to become so desperate that eventually they started eating each other. So the very fear of cannibals caused them eventually to be cannibals. It's a very strange story, isn't it? But its story, of course, is from a long time ago, so we shouldn't feel too sad about it or too strong about it. It's a long time ago. And we probably wouldn't make that mistake right now in the present age, would we? Sometimes we do make mistakes, all of us, when we make decisions based on fear. So there is a general expression that they say that fear is a bad advisor. However, if we do not have any caution at all, we might be reckless in life. So therefore, in Buddhism, there is sometimes talked about a general sense of fear that is positive and good. And that is especially with regard to morality, like a sort of caution and carefulness, as I mentioned already. But then when we talk about the fear that I mentioned in the beginning, number 4, this one is very fundamental, right? We all, some people might be afraid that they might lose their job or something like that, or the reputation, embarrassment. These things depend on every person. It depends on how much we are attached to our work, reputation. But there is one thing that we all have in common that is we cannot avoid. That is the fear of death. But the Buddha actually talked about, there's one Buddhist teaching in which the Buddha, he said that there is actually a way to deal with the fear of death. Sometimes we read about these things and it looks very distant and very difficult, you know. Sometimes when you read about some Buddhist text talking about enlightenment, it seems very far away from us. But if you break it down, they are all, actually all of these are just practices, way we can practice. For example, if you go back to these 5 fears mentioned in the beginning, these are all things that we can reflect on, you know. Suppose you are somebody that in the current situation is afraid of losing his job, then you can reflect on that in life. We always lose things. They come and they go. There's always some insecurity in life. We cannot expect full security. Actually, we all have things that we gain and lose all the time. This is common in our lives. But the most important thing is that we realize that we take good care of our loved ones, that we respect the people, our parents, our teachers. There's a lot we still have, even if we didn't have a job. We can think about it like that. Or if we are somebody who's easy to be afraid of losing your reputation, then you can reflect that we all sometimes lose our reputation. Everyone sometimes has a better reputation and sometimes a worse reputation. It goes up and down. We all have the ups and downs in our life. And if we often reflect that these ups and downs will always continue to exist, then we will not be so much attached to it. So this is some way we can reflect on these things. But the fear of death is a bit more fundamental. You know, we all are afraid of death. It's normal. But there is actually one Buddhist teaching in which the Buddha said that we can deal with even the fear of death. And he said that when we have 4 characteristics, then we will not be afraid of death. 4 kind of people that are not afraid of death. A person who is free from the desires of the senses. Okay, this sounds very high goal, right? Very difficult to do. But it simply means that you are aware of the sort of desires that do not help you. The sort of things that the more we grow attached to, the more we are afraid. Like if you are somebody who really loves your possessions very much, then you will also be more afraid of losing your possessions. So the word sense desires here means basically everything, the material and all the things that somehow make it hard for us to be free. Sometimes it doesn't mean that we all have to be monks and nuns, but it simply means that we can sometimes reflect on the things that we have. To what extent do we really need them? We, for example, have a rule in the Buddhist monastic discipline that if you have anything that you're not going to use within the period of a month, then you should give it to somebody else. Even for ropes, like a monk's rope, if you keep it for longer than 10 days, you're supposed to give it to somebody else. And it's quite interesting, you know, even in the present day when there's many comforts and many luxuries, we can often reflect, what things do we really need in life? If you often think about that, then you will not be attached, or you will not be stuck to the material things as much. These days, many people, they like to keep things simple more. And maybe it's a response to the society becoming more complex. So we often hear about people who like to keep their house very simple, not so many things. And I've heard about some time ago in the United Kingdom, there was a project actually to in one supermarket to remove all the clutter, all the pictures and everything from the products, to just have 1 week when the entire supermarket was just very simple, and only a simple logo on every product, but no letters, nothing. So in this way, the supermarket had like a special week in which all the customers were encouraged to meditate, and also they had this project of all the products looking very simple. I can't remember the exact name of the supermarket, but it was a supermarket in the United Kingdom. There is also another kind of thing that helps you to be less afraid in life, and that is if we are less attached to our body. Sometimes when we are much involved in whether we are growing older or not, then we sometimes also become more afraid. So if we often reflect that we all must grow old, we all must be sick sometimes, and we all must die, this is a part of life, then we also are attached to the body less. Now, this is always sometimes a bit of a confusion, because some people tell me that, sometimes they tell me that it sounds very pessimist, right? Some people, I've heard some people say that, you know, it's very pessimist, very negative in Buddhism to always talk about old age and sickness and suffering. And one man actually came to me and told me that we should not talk about old age and sickness and death in Buddhism so much, because it just makes us more older and more sick and more something like that. But in fact, we do not need to think about it like that. It's simply an awareness that we must all sometimes grow old, sick, and die. But it doesn't mean that we consider ourselves already old. It just means that we think about the impermanence of things, that the things change all the time, and that we cannot eventually hold on to our body and our physical appearance as it is now. All of us eventually have just borrowed this body as a just part of this earth, which we have borrowed for the time being. And eventually we are going to have to return it. If you think about it like that, then you will have less fear. Another thing is that if you do good in your life, you do a lot of good deeds, like very important good deeds in Buddhism, in Thai Buddhism, very important is simply generosity, giving to the poor, giving to the temple, giving to your friends. These are important forms of generosity. Or simply meditating is also a form of goodness. If you have many good deeds in your life and you also didn't do anything wrong, or you try to keep that to limited, then you also find that there is little fear. And it doesn't mean that we all have to believe in the next life, or sometimes you hear that there is afterlife or not. Is there? Sometimes some people believe in that, or sometimes they do not. But that's not the main point. The main point is that whether there is an afterlife or not, we can all assume that if we have many good deeds in our lives and not done much, we didn't make many mistakes, then we will be happy in our lives and won't regret it. Now, I'm not saying that it's normal. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any regrets. We all make mistakes sometimes, but I'm just saying that if we often do good, then we will not. We will have more fulfilled life, and fear will be have less of an impact in your life. The last one, the last item, having no doubts about inner attainment, is about enlightenment. So we all. This is a bit higher goal in Buddhism. So it's often said, so these reflections are like reflections that help us to be more careful in life and to be less, learn to let go more. Sometimes when we talk about good fear, some forms of fear that are not bad, it may also be because of more some caution or something like that that I mentioned. There's also different kinds of like that. Now, we talked about doing good, right? When we talk about doing good deeds, we also find that if we often do good, there is also a certain courage in that. So I just talked about how that we sometimes we have we deal with the fears that we have in our life, but there's also the positive part that we develop courage, and the courage to do good is of course the most important courage. The courage to do good is actually a very important quality. There's different ways that we can develop courage. The first one sounds very religious, right? Faith. Faith in Buddhism, however, faith doesn't mean so much that you must be Buddhist or something like that, or that you must be Christian or something like that. Faith in Buddhism means that you believe that all the good deeds that you do pay off, and all the things that you do wrong also come back to you. This is faith in Buddhism. And then there is also, of course, if you often think about that, this principle that all the good things we do come back to us, and also the wrong things we do, then we are more courageous. We feel more courage to do good. We don't have to wait for other people to approve of our good initiatives or good things to do. Suppose you know of an elderly neighbor that is a bit older, and you might want to give some food to your elderly neighbor, or sometimes you just want to take a bit care of your elderly neighbor. And then sometimes some other people, they might find is not necessary or something like that. But to sometimes push on and do good is exactly the courage that I'm talking about. If you are aware that every good deed that we do, everything we say, everything we do, comes back to us and is more than just a matter of whether people praise us or not. That's not important. It's about how it comes back into our lives, and how the goodness itself improves our mind, improves our character, improves our mind, and it always is not only good for us, but also for the people around us. So this is some example of how we can have courage to do because of faith. Then there is also moral discipline. Have discipline in your life. If you have a discipline, it's like you have certain things, certain moral principles that you adhere to, that you find important. that also can give you courage to do good. Like moral discipline sometimes, for example, if you are somebody who've made the decision not to smoke, and you can stick to your decision not to smoke anymore, then that also gives you a sense of courage, because you can stick to your moral principles. And then there is being learned. Being learned, sometimes it seems not to connect with courage, but sometimes it can, you know. If, for example, sometimes having knowledge can also help you to do good. For example, there is a lot of scientific research that has proven that if you often look at all the things you've gained in your life, the gratitude, as we call it, you know, if you have gratitude in your life, that you often reflect on all the good things that you've had, all the blessings you have in your life. It's been proven in scientific research that that actually helps a lot, both in mental health and in physical health. And so if just the knowledge of that being so can already give you the courage to do good, because you know that it helps. It's like a sort of wisdom, but it's slightly different than wisdom. It's more like knowing the data, knowing the knowledge. Effort is also important. If you often you often do good. For example, you often you are a person that is diligent often. Then it's easy also to have courage. In the ancient Indian Pali language, the word for effort and the word for courage is almost the same word. And the word for effort is virya, but the word for courage is vira. It's almost the same word. So if you often put in an effort, for example, if you just reserve some time every day to meditate a little, even if it's just a little, but you have some time every day, then that already gives you some courage. Because like, even if you sometimes are not in the mood to meditate, you still have the feeling, well, I'd like to keep up the habit. And that gives you the courage to continue that good thing. So the final thing is wisdom. Wisdom always brings us closer to goodness, because it gives us a sense of what is important in life. So these are some of my thoughts about fear. And it's always difficult to deal with fear, you know, especially in these days, in this time. But if we often reflect on the things that we can control and the things we cannot control, then that also helps a lot. If we, for example, go back to the example that I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of things here that you know, that doesn't really help us, you know. If we are fearing because we want to have something but we cannot have it, or we are afraid because we have anger towards our neighbors or anger towards other people, these are all fears that we can learn to understand better if we meditate often. Because when we meditate often, our thoughts become clearer, our mind become clear, and therefore also negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions have less of a grip on our mind. So these are some of my thoughts for today about fear and afraid in our life, the fears that we might have in our life. Personally, I think this is quite a profound topic to talk about. And, you know, if you ask me, for me, is it a fearful situation that we are in? I think yes and no. At the one hand, this is like a difficult situation because we all have these, we hear all this negative information, how easily you can become ill or this or that. But at the same time, we just if we focus on the things that we can really control, which is just you know, the good caution, the carefulness that we have in our life, and the rest we cannot control. We cannot all control everything. The other day, my mother was actually had a serious condition, and it was probably, in hindsight, it was probably a light form of COVID. But eventually she recovered. But it was kind of, you know, difficult time because we didn't know, you know, if my mother was going to recover or was going to get worse or something like that. Because my mother is already over 70 years old. So this is kind of a difficult situation, but we just reflect what we can do. You know, we can do is we can be there for that person, and we cannot control how that person's life is going to be next, but we can be there, we can give encouragement. That's what we can do. So these are some examples that I'd like to mention. And are there any questions